So at least somebody is brave enough to speak up about how bad this climate crisis is. And that is the UN chief warns of gates to hell and climate summit. But carbon-polluting nations stay silent, and that includes our own country, the United States. So, United Nations. The head of the United Nations warned Wednesday that the gates of hell are at hand as climate change intensifies. And top international officials said the world's leaders still aren't doing nearly enough to curb pollution of heat-trapping gases. They pleaded with major emitting nations to do more. Those nations remained silent. They weren't allowed to speak because organizers said they had no new actions to take. The only countries that touted their efforts, first movers and doers, the United Nations called them, were responsible for just 1/9 of the world's annual carbon pollution. Humanity has opened the gates to hell, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said Wednesday, opening a special climate ambition summit with yet another plea for action. Horrendous heat is having horrendous effects. Distraught farmers watching crops carried away by floods, sweltering temperatures spawning disease, and thousands fleeing in fear as historic fires rage. Guterres convened the summit with the idea that only world leaders who came with new concrete actions would get to address their peers on the issue. But leaders of the countries that produce the most heat-trapping gases themselves chose not to even ask. Heads of state from China, the United States, India, Russia, the United Kingdom, and France all skipped the summit. The United Nations, which has put the most carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over the decades, sent its climate envoy, John Kerry, to the summit even though President Joe Biden was in town. Yeah, Joe Biden didn't even show up. Shows you he doesn't care about the climate crisis. Then the United Nations didn't give Kerry a speaking spot, but California Governor Gavin Newsom was given the chance to speak and tout his state's efforts. The 32 national leaders who did qualify represent only 11% of the world's carbon dioxide pollution. China and the United States both emit more carbon dioxide than those 32 countries combined. The European Commission's president was also permitted to speak. We are in the final stages of what actions are needed to preserve this planet, and regrettably, I'm not sure everybody is getting it, said Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who called on debt pauses and cancellations and changes in multinational development banks and the insurance industry. Motley, a leader of poorer nations struck frequently by extreme weather, lamented that everybody was paying attention to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was speaking at the same time at the Security Council. While she stands in support of Ukraine, she said climate change is a greater threat because more lives are at stake globally than they are in Ukraine. Extra efforts are called for. Even though the world in 2015 adopted a goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times, instead, Earth is on path to a warming 2.8 degrees Celsius, that's 5 degrees Fahrenheit, a dangerous and unstable world, Guterres warned. The world has already warmed at least 1.1 degrees Celsius, that's 2 degrees Fahrenheit, since the middle of the 19th century. But the future is not fixed. It is for leaders like you to write it, Guterres said. Guterres called on major emitters who have benefited most from fossil fuels to make extra efforts to cut emissions and on wealthy countries to support emerging economies to do so. They were silent. There's no doubt that the absence of so many leaders from the world's biggest economies and emitters will clearly have an impact on the outcomes of the summit and diminish the contribution that many of us had hoped it could make, said longtime climate negotiation analyst Alden Meyer of the European think tank 3EG. On the same day, Guterres called for more and faster cuts in heat-trapping emissions and in spending helping poor countries shift to renewable energy and adapt to a warming world. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak appeared poised to slow down his country's efforts and go in the opposite direction. Yes, and I'm just going to interject here that, somebody else I follow here on YouTube is talking about similar movements in Canada going on, despite the fact that Canada is on fire. There is an epidemic of greed in this world, and it's running rampant. So, getting back to the article, in contrast, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen crowed about how their members pledged to reduce carbon emissions 55% by 2030 and is doing even better than that. Guterres, a new special UN report on the lack of progress In the fight against climate change, activists and scientists have called for a phase out of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. But international negotiators keep away from adopting such a big move. And it says smaller nations can't go it alone. On Wednesday, Guterres once again pushed for an end to fossil fuel subsidies, something he said reached an incredible $7 trillion in 2022. The Secretary General criticized the naked greed of entrenched interests raking in billions from fossil fuels. He called on wealthy nations to fulfill their $100 billion pledges to help poorer countries deal with climate change. The United States is one of those countries that hasn't done so. The UN chief has also pushed for countries to spend even more than they've promised and put in money for a loss and damage fund agreed upon last year that are sort of payments to help nations harmed by extreme weather from global warming. Africa can leapfrog into a fully green industrial paradigm, Kenyan President William Ruto said, yet we cannot and must not do this on our own. To get there, Africa needs the world to change its debt and credit systems, an extra $500 billion in federal financial help, and a global tax. What we need is fairness, a fair financial system. A new hope. Well, I don't think there's much hope left. I don't have much hope left. I don't have any hope left, really, that we're ever going to fix this. Sultan Al Jaber, who will run the upcoming climate negotiations in Dubai, put a giant number on the problem, 22 metric tons. That's how much carbon dioxide emissions the world has to cut in the next 7 years to reach the world's climate fighting goal. Then he came up with a bigger number. It will cost the globe between $4 trillion and $5 trillion a year. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge, Al Jaber told the summit. Let's go after the gigatons, not each other. Experts in the United Nations say the world needs to reduce emissions by 43% in the next 7 years to reach the goal set by the 2015 Paris Agreement. Yeah, we still haven't reached that goal. This started as the Climate Ambition Summit, and I believe it ends as the Climate Hope Summit, Guterres said by wrapping up the day-long meetings. The promises and actions discussed Wednesday keep alive the world's chances of limiting warming to the international goal, Guterres said. We are not there yet, he said. But there are cities, regions, and companies that are leading the way. If these first movers and first doers can do it, everybody can do it. But the problem is that a lot of the world is moving away from caring about the environment. I'm going to talk just a little bit about Canada here. All right. And Canada Prime Minister election, all right, coming up. All right. So I think there's an election coming up. All right. And there is an election coming up, and the problem is in Canada, and we're trying to find the news here about Canada. But Canada is there is a conservative. Yeah, we'll just do this here. All right. All right. So it says an election could be 2 years away. I don't know how the government works in Canada, but there's growing support of conservatives in Canada. Conservatives who deny climate change. All right. People like Pierre Poilievre. All right. People like this. Basically a modern day Trump. All right. See, Trump is a disease. It's not just Trump. You have all these populists that are he doesn't care about the environment. All right? He doesn't care about the environment. All right? He wants to export more fossil fuels. All right? So this is the problem you have. All right? You have a lot of these people on the extreme right. Here we go. Modern day Trump. And this is going on in Canada. So you have all these countries moving to the right on some of the worst issues, like climate change, that people are in denial in the face of everything going on, especially in Canada. This is where I'm going to rant a little bit, all right? Especially in Canada, a country that's been on fire, and yet they want to support people that are denying what's going on. All right, and a lot of these places where these fires are burning, like Alberta, big fossil fuel generators, Alberta tar sands and all that stuff, all right, that you see here, all right? And They want to keep doing it in the face of all this, in the face of even towns that are built that had a lot of fossil fuel workers that burned to the ground. They still don't get it. How thick are people? How thick are humans? Homo sapiens. They'd rather go and idolize these people like Trump, Musk, or whatever else populist piece of shit out there that doesn't give a shit about the planet. You know what I mean? I mean, really. That's what they want to embrace. What is wrong with people on this planet? And you have this going on in the UK too. So Canada is now basically getting infected by the Trump disease from the United States. It's now spread to Canada. All right. And I had to bring this up because if Canada becomes like the United States, this world is going to get even worse than it already is. All right. And what more proof do you need? Look at this big hurricane so far north in the Atlantic. Oh, and then we have another one forming off here. All right. How many more natural disasters? But see, whatever the case is, people are thick. They don't get it. Even in Canada, a country that has been ravaged by wildfires, they still don't get it. What is wrong with people? So, anyway, figured I would share this article with you, and there is no hope. We're doomed. And he's trying to be optimistic, but I don't have any optimism at this point. Things are going to keep getting worse. There aren't enough people who are enlightened on this planet. There are way more bad people than there are good people. It just seems to be that way. All right? And it's unfortunate. But that is all. I'm going to end the video here. Thank you for watching.